We are here today to talk about what I've called on this slide one big bewildering question. And that's somewhat a play on words because the federal tax credit scholarship program was created in the quote One Big Beautiful Bill Act last summer. But it also sort of describes this confusion that I think some of us have been feeling about whether Illinois should opt in. I would venture to guess that a lot of people on this call have strong opinions one way or the other, and maybe don't feel quite as bewildered as some of us. Um, my name's Jessica. Like I said, I'm the executive director at Stanford Children, Illinois, which is one of 18 states that have yet to decide whether to participate in the program. And I'm joined by my colleagues, Amy Galvin and Karina Donaire. And we are also really fortunate today to have Josh Stafford and Ann Corder, who are going to share their perspectives on the pros and cons to Illinois participating in the program. So I'm just admitting to like personally being in this somewhat ambivalent place right now. That's one reason we're going to be using Mentee a lot today. We want to capture a lot of your like feedback and input. All right. So I mean, so this is our agenda. We're gonna, this is our welcome. We're going to, I'm going to share a little bit of like preliminary information just about what the tax credit scholarship program is. Then we're going to hear from Josh Stafford, superintendent at Vienna, to tell us about his perspective, and then Ann Corder, who's going to tell us about her perspective with the League of Women Voters. And then we'll have a lot of discussion. But the first thing I want to do is turn it over to Amy, who is our Mentee MC today. And we're going to kind of see who's in the room and get a sense of what people's preliminary thoughts are. So Amy?
There we go. So you guys should be able to see my screen now that has the Mentee QR code. You can use your phone to scan that code and that'll take you to it, or you can go to mentee.com and then put that code in there, and then you'll be able to start answering our first questions. I'm going to move the slide, but you will be able to still see this. And I see our joins are going up. So go ahead, we can answer that first question. Again, I see some folks still joining us on the Mentee, and then I will reveal the responses. So the first one's a pretty easy one. What is your role? And then feel free to, if you're a teacher and a parent, feel free to check both boxes. So we'll have some duplicates there. We got some good responses coming. All right, I'm gonna do a quick show. Whoops, a quick show there. Lots of advocates and community leaders. That's great. Some parents, teachers. Excellent. We will have a lot of representation. All right. I'm going to move us to the next slide. Looks like we got good logins. And then again, same thing. If you feel what types of schools have you attended or sent your children to, taught in, feel free to check more than one. Again, if you are teaching at a public school or your students are in private school or vice versa or whatever, or if maybe their education was split across schools, feel free to choose more than one. And I will give some folks some time to answer. I still hear some people joining the Zoom. Folks, if you're just joining the Zoom, go ahead, scan that QR code with your phone or go to mentee.com. I think we got one more question, but we'll come back to this, so don't close your browsers. All right. I'm going to go ahead and hit show responses. I think you guys will still be able to respond. Looks like it's pretty mixed. That's a strange result. Okay.
Is that traditional public bar the same color as the background?
I was like, that is exactly, I'm like, so 10, that's exactly what Mentee chose to do there. Sorry about that. We did not select the colors. This was a Mentee choice. Not very accessible. All right. Sorry about that, guys. But yeah, 10 people here and then a kind of a diversity across some of the others. But most of us are looking like we're coming from and we've taught, attended, sent our children to public schools. All right. Last question. And hopefully, yeah. So again, this bar looks like it will be purple. Sorry about that. We did not catch that before. So yeah, go ahead. Have you heard much about it? We know a lot of people, there's been a lot of discussion about this, but some people are just tuning in. And so we just wanted to capture kind of where people are on that spectrum. So go ahead and put some responses in. Looks like we got pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and show. Again, don't forget our one here in our matching purple. But most people know a lot and they're looking to kind of learn more, which exactly what we're hoping to do today. So thank you guys all for joining us. I think this is going to lead to a really robust discussion. So thank you again. And I think that is all we have for this section. Don't close your mentees though. We will come back to mentees. So just keep the screen open and then we will jump back here later in the program.
All right. Thanks, Amy. And thanks everyone for sharing. We're gonna do this is our first of like 3 rounds where we're gonna break for some mentee stuff. So Karina is going back to sharing our slides, and I am going to try to keep this next part to 8 minutes. That's my goal. To just run through what is the program, what is this thing we're talking about, before we get into the conundrum of what Illinois should do about it. So the federal tax credit scholarship program allows taxpayers to receive a tax credit of $1,700 if they give to a qualified scholarship granting organization starting 2027. To be a qualified scholarship granting organization, a 501c3 organization has to spend at least 70% of their revenue on scholarships. They have to limit those scholarships to students and families below 300% of area median income, which is very very high. So for a family of 4 in Chicago, it's like $360,000. And they have to provide scholarships to students at more than one school. So the individual school cannot create a fund that just exists for that school and gives money there. But an SGO could be created to partner with 2 schools and give scholarships to students in both of those 2 schools, but it can't be just for one. All right. So these are really rough estimates, but I wanted to get a sense of how much can be generated by this, because I've heard this has the potential to be the largest federal education program that exists. And so just a little like back of the envelope math about how big this could be. If about half of people owe income taxes. Everybody pays taxes. They pay sales taxes. They pay, whatever taxes there are, but half of people owe income taxes. So, so you can only get your $1,700 back if you pay $1,700. So if everybody participates that's able to, my back of the envelope math shows like $136 billion to be generated, which is more than the Illinois operating budget, including federal funds, general funds, other state funds. If half of people participate that are eligible, that still generates more than the first 2 rounds of ESSER funding. If 30% of people participate, that is the size of the Pell Grant budget. If 15% of people participate, that is the size of the Title I budget, the federal Title I budget. And even if only 5% of people participate, that is still $7 billion. That is still the amount of the ESSER set aside state funds that was used for tutoring and extended day program during and immediately after the pandemic. So this has potential to be a really large, a very large program. Next slide. I'm going to just interrupt Karina. I'm getting a text message from Josh Dwyer that he's having trouble logging in. So if there is a link that you could send him, a direct link that you could send him, that would be appreciated. I see he's on. Sorry about that. All right. All right. Is this the same as Illinois' Invest in Kids program? There are a lot of differences actually between what this federal program is and what the Illinois Invest in Kids program was. That existed from 2018 to 2023. And they're both tax credit scholarship programs. So they operate in somewhat the same, they have somewhat the same mechanics, but the type of scholarships was very different. Invest in Kids was just for private schools. You had to be a state recognized non-public school to be eligible for that type of scholarship. The federal tax credit program, we anticipate being for a broader ecosystem. So private schools, public schools, after school programs, summer camps, extracurriculars, like your piano lessons or whatever, all of those things, I think are going to be eligible to receive scholarships. The family income limits for Invest in Kids was it was 300% of federal poverty line, which is about $100,000 for a family of four in Illinois, or in the Chicago area. The federal tax credit scholarship program goes to a much larger family income limit. So 300% of area median income. So that's about $360,000 for a family of four in the Chicago area. Invest in Kids would allow a credit of 75 cents on the dollar. So donors would not get their entire contribution back. They would get 75% of it back on their taxes, and individuals could donate up to $1 million. The federal tax credit scholarship program is 100% credit. So you get everything back. The taxpayer is made completely whole, and they can donate up to $1,700. So, so it's really kind of a different population of people that would be targeted for these donations. I think Invest in Kids, you know, somebody could give up to $1 million, but so much, you know, smaller number of people could give. And then for the federal tax credit scholarship program, $1,700, obviously much smaller. So really more, you know, if it's going to generate a lot of money, people are going to be looking at middle income people to donate. And then the program cost for Invest in Kids, it couldn't exceed more than $75 million. But for the federal tax credit scholarship program, there is no upper limit. So if everybody donates, then that's how much money is in the program. And that's how much money then is also not in federal tax receipts that are going to the federal government. And then scholarship granting organizations during the Invest in Kids era, I looked at their last annual report, and there were 8 scholarship granting organizations that awarded about 10,000 scholarships a year. For the federal tax credit scholarship program, we anticipate lots and lots of scholarship granting organizations, and they can be national or multi-state. So there could be one of these 501c3 organizations created nationally that gives scholarships to every state that has opted in. So expected to be much more. And then this question of who decides whether Illinois participates, starting with this kind of fundamental like fact that the federal government has already passed this, and all taxpayers are eligible to participate. So no matter what Illinois does, all taxpayers are eligible to kick in their $1,700. They would give it to a scholarship granting organization of their choice. And then the federal government would reduce their tax liability by $1,700. Hence why I put donate in quotes, because they choose where the $1,700 goes. $1,700 go, essentially. Does the taxpayer want it to go to this scholarship granting organization to serve this type of student or that type of student? Or do they want it to go to the federal government to be used for, you know, the budget? Next slide. So then the next question is to become an SGO, an organization has to be on the governor's list. So every governor gets to decide whether they opt in or opt out. And actually, in some cases, we'll see in a bit, the legislature has also passed a bill like mandating their governor to opt in. Or supporting their governor who already did opt in some cases. So the governor has to opt in, and then the governor submits a list of eligible scholarship granting organizations to give scholarships in their states. So if an SGO is not on the governor's list, then students cannot get scholarships in that state from that scholarship granting organization. And so SGOs are going to, you know, try to get on the governor's list. They're going to try to get taxpayers to give them money, and then they are going to award those to students per their focus. So some SGOs will be created to give private school tuition money to students. Some will be created to provide extra services for kids in foster care, or for students with disabilities, or for students who live in neighborhood XYZ. An SGO has to exist in order to do that. So that's why I've got who decides in yellow. I think we think of this as like the governor decides, but I actually think it's the governor decides if students in the state are going to be eligible to participate, and the governor decides which SGOs to put on their list. The SGOs have to exist. So somebody has to have, thought that through and manage that SGO. And then ultimately taxpayers have to decide that they want to donate their money, because they could choose not to. So really three people are deciding what this program is going to look like. Slide. This is a map from the Education Commission of the states in May of 2026 that shows who's opted in and who's opted out. When I looked at this map, I thought, oh, Minnesota and Wisconsin are the only ones that have opted out so far, because that was different than what I had heard before. So, slide. What I had heard originally was Oregon, New Mexico, and Hawaii had opted out, but now the Education Commission of the states are carrying those states in the undecided column. So I just sort of labeled those as unopted out. They had originally said no. Now they're a little bit more like, well, we'll take a look at it. Slide. 3 Democrat states have opted in because their legislature told them to. The Democrat, so it's Republican legislature and Democrat governor in these states: North Carolina, Kentucky, Kansas, and Arizona. And in all of those states except Arizona, the governor vetoed, the legislature overrode, so those states are opted in. And then Arizona, I think we're still waiting to see what happens. It was in the budget bill, and Katie Hobbs vetoed that, and we'll see if she comes back and negotiates that somehow, and whether they're in or out. And then just calling out that 2 of these states are Democrat states where the governor has opted in. So Colorado has been the most vocal about this. Their governor Polis has said we are definitely opting in. And then more recently, Kathy Hochul in New York said that they are planning to opt in, barring anything crazy in the regulations. Slide. This is a quick timeline of what's happened. So it was July 4th when the bill passed last year, and in December of 25, comments were due to the Department of Treasury about what the regulations would look like, and March 17th, Illinois saw 32 counties put this on ballot initiatives. It's obviously like really complicated, like more complicated than one sentence on a ballot initiative would suggest, but it did pass favorably in all of those ballot initiatives. We've been talking about this a lot with our literacy coalition, which also I think feels a lot of feels like it's quite a conundrum. We've done a lot of outreach, mostly around tutoring and literacy tutoring for public schools, the scalability, the capacity to do that well. You've probably read my blog post because it was linked in the invite to this. But our position so far as Stand for Children, and also kind of as the Literacy Coalition, has been we need to see the regulations and see what's in them and go from there. Waiting for the regulations is not a bad move right now, because there are a lot of unanswered questions. But the decision point for us now is like, what should our position be once the regulations are released? And we are not sure what the answer is to that. This chart says the Department of Treasury rules are anticipated this month. I heard somebody say that maybe some like preliminary guidelines are going to come out, but that we're going to probably have to wait until August. Somebody even told me yesterday that it was September when rules are coming out. So it's getting down to crunch time, and we still don't really know when those are coming out or what they're going to say. But we know that states have until the end of the year to opt in if we are to participate in 2027. And I think we are going to Amy now, our mentee MC, to to get some feedback. Amy, are you I'm unmute.
I'm sorry about that. Thank you. Too many clicks. So yeah, but going to our first question is, do you think states should wait? You'll see that the background color has changed, so now the purple will be visible. But this is just a quick question. I see 18 or so have responded, so I'll give people a minute to click there, and then we'll have one more question following this. A few more ticking up. All right. Okay, I got 12. I'm gonna go ahead and click it. I'll give people one more minute. Great, let's show the responses. So yes, there's some disagreement here. There's still some unsures, but again, we're all kind of learning together here. But a lot of folks on the line do agree that we should wait to get those federal guidelines. And then, so that is good to know. And then the next question here, what are some questions and comments or thoughts you have about the program? Well, this is a moment to pause. We're about to turn over to our two guest speakers. Go ahead, if you have questions for them or if you just have preliminary questions, we're going to capture some of those. You can fill this out while the speakers are still speaking. And so this is how we'll kind of address questions to them. You guys can also throw stuff in the chat, but we thought this would be a seamless way to capture some questions, thoughts, comments. So I'll give folks a minute or two, and then we'll turn it over to our first guest speaker.
All right. Well, Amy, if you want to unshare your screen, Karina can share her screen. I will introduce our speakers while people are kind of thinking of any preliminary questions that are on their mind and entering them into that mentee prompt. So what was really important to us is to get people who are focused on public schools to be our guest speakers today. Josh Stafford, we've known for quite a while. Josh does amazing work in a small high school district in deep downstate Illinois, essentially like North Kentucky. And they graduate a huge proportion of their kids with like a year of college under their belt or an associate's degree already. They do really innovative things in a really underfunded environment. And so I've asked Josh to share why he is pro Illinois opting in. I think it's a really interesting perspective that is not the usual one that we hear. And then Anne, I met on a different coalition. Anne is with the League of Women Voters, and she was the first one I heard about these ballot initiatives from. She's been on numerous television programs doing debates about why this is not a good idea for public schools. And so I'm so honored to have both of these two education leaders to speak to us today. I'm going to turn it over to Josh first to share his perspective, and then we'll go to Anne second.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Jessica. Really appreciate the opportunity. Really appreciate the opportunity to visit with you all and speak about this today. Jessica says North Kentucky. I think it's because of my accent. So I'll just acknowledge that right up front. Also want to acknowledge right up front, Ann and I were just on a call moments before this. And so while we're maybe representing some different perspectives here, certainly have like-minded views on making sure that kids get adequately funded educational opportunities in the state of Illinois, and have worked in tandem on those efforts through EBF and mandated categoricals and things such as that. So I do think, regardless of the perspective, I'm convinced that we're all here for the same thing at the end of the day, and that is to provide the best educational opportunities and outcomes for the kids that we all love the most. So I appreciate that up front. As Jessica's already said, my name is Joshua Stafford. I do serve as a school superintendent in Vienna, Illinois. Three things to know real quick. I know that everyone else on the face of the planet pronounces it Vienna. So in Illinois, it is pronounced Vienna. So the next time you're on I-24 heading into West Kentucky, you'll be able to impress your family and everybody that's with you by correctly pronouncing it from Illinois. You can proudly say Vienna. I do serve in a public school district, obviously, as Jessica's indicated, and just want to think through that public school students can take advantage of this as well as private school students. And I think that when this first started, right, my first thought on it was it's private schools, vouchers, things like that. And that's true. But what's the reality of public school students being able to access these things and public schools as well? So the educational tax credits are allowed to be spent on school tuition and fees and books and supplies and equipment, academic tutoring, special needs services for students with disabilities, supplemental items such as uniforms and transportation, extended day programs, outside of school programs. Additionally, the funds can be used for technology, hardware, software, internet access, things of that nature. And the community that I serve here in Vienna has over 50% of our students that are low-income families. And these allowable expenses are all things that students in my community can benefit from as I look through the list of those allowable expenses and know the kids and families in my region. And I do realize that some have concerns about the federal education tax credit. I do understand those concerns, and at the same time realize that, right, it's no longer a what if, right? We're not sitting here taking a position on do we advocate for this as policy or do we not. Instead, it's a passed law at the federal level. And so we're not interacting with it in terms of advocacy for or against it. Instead, each state now gets to decide whether students and schools in those states are opted in. And I think that's an important delineation too. The decision is, are students and schools opted in, not federal income taxpayers, right? On the other hand, of schools and students are those federal income taxpayers, and by default, they're in, so they can access this. And I think from my perspective, right, I don't have to like policy or love it or dislike it. I just have to figure out how do I take the rules in which I'm given and play by them in such a way that I can benefit kids that I've been entrusted to make sure they get the best opportunities in education. And I think that the bottom line for me in this is that Illinois dollars should stay in Illinois and be invested in Illinois kids. And I think to kind of think through that, or for me to think through that, I've had to look through the lens of that federal income taxpayer that's defaulted in, right? That doesn't matter if the state's in or out. We as federal income taxpayers are defaulted in. So let's say that you owe the federal government $10,000 for your 2027 federal income taxes. Your tax preparer, right, if they're halfway worth their salt, they're going to sit down and they're going to say, hey, option A, do you want to send the entire, let's say you owe $10,000 to DC in federal income tax. They're going to say, do you want to send that entire $10,000 to DC to let them decide what to do with it? Or option B, do you want to take $1,700 of that and send it to a scholarship granting organization affiliated with a school and a kid that you know? When you're sitting down talking to a federal income taxpayer, that seems like that decision becomes relatively easy, right, outside of our educational circles. If Illinois opts in, you'll be able to give your $1,700 to an SGO of your choosing that benefits kids in Illinois. If Illinois doesn't opt in, you will still be able to take that $1,700 credit, but it'll have to go outside of our state. I go back to that bottom line. Illinois dollars should stay in Illinois and be invested in Illinois kids. My geography, right? A great deal of the state of Illinois' geography I'm near rivers. Southeast Missouri is super close. Southern Indiana, super close. Kentucky I could throw a rock and hit it. And so, people know families there. Those states have opted in, and they're going to be campaigning to get that $1,700 from Illinois folks, undoubtedly, whether Illinois is in or out. And so I think we also have a timeline issue here. While the federal law is established, right, we're still waiting on some final IRS rules and regulations. And I do understand the desire, as has been stated, to see those before final comments or commitments are made. And at the same time, I realize it's just 7 short months away from starting that 27 tax year. That's a short timeline. Events such as this, right, are important that we're kind of gathering here and educating ourselves on it. And I think, right, as I look through that public school lens, we have started that process of establishing a 501c3 and an SGO and those type of things, because all of that takes time. And if Illinois does opt in, I want to be able to say, hey, there are kids in Vienna public school kids that can greatly benefit from this. And this might be the most important thing I'll say, and then I'll hush. But if Illinois does opt in, please remember Vienna and the Vienna affiliated SGO for your $1,700 tax credit. You won't be disappointed, and you'll see a return on your investment. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Josh. And let me turn it over to you.
You know, I totally appreciate what Vienna is struggling with, and I totally understand the effort to make lemonade out of lemons. I think we all probably agree that this whole program is a giant lemon. The question for us is, do we need to accept that lemon, or would we be better off if Illinois just rejects the whole thing and goes on our merry way? And, you know, I believe, as a former school board president in Oak Park and, you know, longtime member of the various education associations, that Illinois will be very much better off if we just say no, because there are so many negatives associated with private school vouchers that will hurt public education in this state. And we were very thrilled that we were able to sunset Invest in Kids, and we don't want to backtrack on that. So I just want to show you the list of pros and cons that the league has come up with. If we opt out this year, it has to be renewed every year, this decision. We think we should opt out for the long haul. Some of that money that we're sending to the SGO will go for private schools. Oh, and by the way, you know, that money that you're sending to Washington, some of that does come back in IDEA money and Title I money. We need those federal dollars to go into the federal education pot. And so it's not just in some black hole. Those are federal education dollars that will come back to Illinois if they're sufficient, maybe. So the public money would be going for private, mostly religious schools, and that undermines transparency, accountability, high standards, protection of our students' civil rights. Because when kids leave our public schools and go to a private school, they sign away their right to an IEP. They sign away their right to be free from discrimination based on the composition of their family. And it undermines our stability. Education, I think we all agree, is a very important public good, and it underpins democracy in our country. And perhaps that is why this bill was passed with the goal of undermining our public education system. The cost to public education from students leaving for private schools is clear. It's our schools are funded on a per pupil basis, and when kids leave a classroom, that will cut back on the state money coming into the district. Meanwhile, the schools still have fixed costs for busing or for the roof or for teachers, and those costs then will have to be stretched out with fewer students, and likely higher need students would be left behind, because those private schools often turn away high needs kids. And so another big thing for the league is quality and accountability standards. SGOs will have no standards for their operations. They will have very little oversight, and private schools likely will not also have any standards or oversight for safety, for quality, for outcomes, for testing. We won't know where those dollars are going or how they're being used. And all indications are that governors will not be allowed to intervene in any way, will not have any discretion about which SGOs are picked. And I don't think we need to wait for the regulations to come out. We know already that this is not going to be a good program. And I took a minute to look at how the money flows. Vienna is seeing a real need for more state funding, as are most of the schools in our state. We have a funding gap of $3 billion that Springfield needs to come up with, and they can. We need to keep pushing them through Advance Illinois and funding our schools' efforts, and we can get there. We can do it. Currently, I did the back of the envelope calculation on how much money we could get from these SGOs, perhaps. If, say, 10% participated, there could be maybe $1 billion potentially on the table. But the private school tuition comes to $2.3 billion in this state. All of that money potentially could be swept up by those private schools, and there would be no money left for public schools. And if there even were a little bit left, it would not be worth it. We also don't want to endanger the private donations that we currently enjoy to public schools. People can still write checks and get a tax deduction as a charitable deduction. The estimate is maybe 364 million currently is coming from PTAs and public school foundations that exist. And we don't want to endanger, people, will they write 2 checks? I don't know. But we want to keep that money flowing as well. And it's important to remember that this is not the only possible way that you can contribute to your public schools. You can still write a check to your PTA. You can still write a check to your public school foundation. There's 482 existing foundations, and there could be more set up. If Illinois opts in, it would be certainly wise to establish a foundation for every district. But I think we don't need to do that. We can go ahead and say no to this program. There's lots of organizations that have stood up and said, no, we don't want this. This is a partial list of some of them. The School Superintendents Association, which has had seminars on how to set up a foundation for your district, but they are fundamentally opposed to the whole program. They would welcome, I think, Illinois saying no to this program. If you're in a state where the governor is bound and determined to adopt it, sure, go ahead and set up a foundation, but we still have a choice in Illinois. And I think we are going to be much better off if we don't go there. As I said, public schools lose money under private school voucher programs. Federal spending leaves equity behind. And Jessica, you mentioned piano lessons. I don't think that's going to be covered. It's not going to cover programs and services that are already paid for with public dollars offered during the public school day. Not the piano lessons are. That's just kind of outside the list, I think. So if your HVAC system is bad or you need more counselors, this money isn't going to go there. And I think even more telling is that funds are most likely to remain in wealthy communities. I appreciate the pitch to target your dollars to Vienna. Odds are that people in Oak Park, say, would send their money to Oak Park schools. Sorry. And In Arizona, where they've had a similar universal program, the experience has been that most of the money, the majority of the money, goes to the more wealthy communities. So programs like Title I that are targeted to address low-income needs, those will be underfunded, where these vouchers will be going to communities where they don't need the money as much. So fundamentally, also there's a lot of fraud and waste and corruption possible. Studies were done in Florida by the League of Women Voters, where they've had a universal program for a long time. And in their voucher system, the SGOs made a mess of it. They were able to get a 3% cut of the vouchers, and they amassed a huge fortune, built a really nice building for themselves, and couldn't account for some of the kids that they'd given vouchers to. And this program has 10% possible as the cut for the SGOs. They can retain 10% of the donations, and that will be many billions of dollars flowing into these organizations. And there are already national groups that have set up SGOs that are ready to come into Illinois. The American Federation for Children, the Betsy DeVos organization is all set up to start soliciting. Just say no. So we are also afraid that as this program grows, if it follows the route that other universal voucher programs have done in states, it will grow and grow. And as that happens, then the federal treasury will have less money coming in, and there will be less support for Title I and IDEA. There's no upper limit on this federal voucher program. They're talking maybe $51 billion. That's a lot of money. As Jessica pointed out, that's more than Title I and IDEA every year. So if the money isn't coming into the federal budget, into the federal treasury, those amounts for those established targeted programs are very likely to shrink. So it's also good to keep in mind where this program came from. Remember the Educational Choice for Children Act. It has been changed at the very last minute to get it passed, to stuff it into the HR 1. And one of the big changes was this no upper cap. And now it's a permanent tax credit. It's not temporary. But the good news is that there is an annual opt-in feature now. Under ECCA, states were required to set up a system to fund private schooling and homeschooling. Now, every state has an option to say no to that. And so the league recommends that we urge the governor to opt out.
All right. I put in chat, and I should have mentioned this earlier on. The League of Women Voters was one of 40 plus organizations that sent a letter to Governor Pritzker urging opt-out. So I've put a link to that letter if others want to read their rationale and who those other groups are. All right. So we've got some questions in the chat. Feel free to keep the questions coming in the chat. Amy, I'm going to turn it over to you now to ask some questions based on what you got from our mentee questions. I know you've been sort of consolidating thoughts on your end. So what questions do you have for our speakers?
Yeah, so lots of questions in mentee in the chat. Keep them coming. We'll go through as many as we can. Let's start with there was quite a few questions about who donates, and so let me read this question. Pritzker has stated that he worries about how extremists may use funds to education to increase anti-Semitism. I too worry about that trend. But what percentage of users will donate to such an SGO? And so I think this is kind of asking about that flow chart that Jessica was showing about. There's lots of different decision makers. So what percentage of
I guess that goes to me, since that's my flow chart, and I have no idea, but I also agree that is something that I worry about. And one of the things that I'm looking for in regulations is to see whether the governor is able to put some parameters like that. Like SGOs that go on the governor's list cannot discriminate based on religion, based on disability status, based on sexual orientation, based on race, class, gender. And I don't know. I mean, I think that's a big variable whether they are allowed to do that. And Josh and Ann, I want to turn it over to you to give any thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, I just would imagine that the American Federation for Children will not put in their promotional materials, we will discriminate against people of the Jewish faith. I'm guessing that they're not going to have that in their pitch. And so you're not really going to know where this money's ending up. But I can say that under Invest in Kids, there was a lot of private money that went to religious schools that do discriminate. And it's highly likely that that experience will be repeated.
Yeah, and I think obviously I come from the lens of the public school world here, and I think we all realize public schools are heavily regulated in terms of ensuring that those things are minimized or don't happen at all. And I think that that's where the opportunity for the public schools here is to really step up to say there is right. If we're not going to change whether Illinois opts in or doesn't opt in, every federal income taxpayer has the opportunity to get a $1,700 for dollar tax credit. And so we're either going to provide opportunities so that public schools can give to, or so that federal income taxpayers can give to public schools, which should not have discrimination, should not have those concerns within their walls, or we're not. And I think that's kind of the seat I sit in, right? It's not a Josh Stafford or Vine is for or against this legislation. It is taking the legislation and saying there is an option that you don't have to worry about discrimination. And I don't care if you live in Arizona, California, Illinois, Oak Park, Springfield, or Vienna, you can give to the SGO, right, that will be utilizing its funds for public school students and not have to be concerned about that discrimination. Now, the other side of that coin, giving to SGOs, I think that each federal income taxpayer is going to have to do a little homework and have some discernment about that, as any of us do whenever we give money.
Yeah, it's important to remember that you don't get money back in your pocket. You only get that tax credit if you've written a check to somebody. And then it comes in April, maybe a year later after you've written that check. So you have to have the money kind of freely sitting around to be able to write that check. And then you have to be able to wait for it to be reducing your taxes, but it won't come back to your pocket.
And Ann, I think that's a good point as well. And I think that our private school counterparts, as I've tried to keep my ear to that ground a little bit, right, to say what are they doing, what is this going to look like, how are they? Because obviously they're going to. I mean, they're going to leverage this in any way that they can. And I've gathered through trying to keep my ear to that ground, that they're even looking at that to work with employers on, hey, we reduce what you're paying in federal income taxes on your paycheck by X amount every month. And right, you just automatically take a deduction from your paycheck. So it's like because I had that same concern, it's like not a lot of people are just going to be able to write a $1,700 check on December 31st, right? They would have to write it by then and then hold until April 15th or whenever they can get that return. And so I think is what I hear kind of out of the private school camp, if you will. It's like they're realizing that and trying to build systems that make that accessible for that person that can't write that $1,700 check. So they're playing the strategy game and tapping into that, which, part of it, I guess.
I will send around in our follow-up a webinar that the Edunomics Lab did recently that sort of blew my mind about how payroll companies are going to get in on this too, and public school districts, and you could do your whole community and say the Park District and the large employers can deduct $150 per pay period, and then in your withholding they could make it whole, and so the large payroll companies get in on this, and this, they systemize how to do this. It's just another way that this could grow really large if if that sort of system gets put in place. Amy, do we have one more like question that you could get out for us? And then
Yeah, this was a great question. So it seems like the administrative burden on public schools to get families to submit forms will be high. What do experts think of that burden? Is there any research about if parents will be willing to essentially engage with this process?
Josh, Josh, you do this sort of thing and you're planning to do it. What do you anticipate?
Yeah, I think that there's always an administrative burden, right? Something new comes along, and it is the local decision that you've got to make of where's that tipping point of I've already got too much on my plate, or I'm trying to build capacity here. It's safe school. Illinois has a great grant. It's called Safe Routes to School. We were awarded that grant. I can't begin to tell you how many forms I had to get from kids and parents and teachers and pictures I had to take and all the stuff. But there are kids I want kids in this community to flourish and have every opportunity that they can have. So guess what we did? We figured out how to take on the administrative paperwork burden to get it done, because I want the dang crosswalk fixed in 2 of my towns so kids are safe crossing the road. And so, yeah, there is that piece. There are vendors, right? I mean, here we get into vendor world, and right there are people who are going to capitalize on this in terms of vendors that are going to provide that service, and that is our design here in America. That right, that they already exist. They've already built the systems. They're raising their hand to say, we will mitigate a great deal of that burden for you if you partner with us as your vendor of choice. Which schools do that every day, right? We partner with all kinds of vendors to mitigate administrative burden or build that capacity within our own systems. So, yeah, for us, is it worth taking on the paperwork burden the way as we sit here and look at it? Yes, it's worth the return on the investment of the paperwork burden.
Yeah, I just want to also point out that there will be a burden on the state as well that's not compensated by this program to monitor the SGOs to the extent they're allowed to make sure that there's not fraud and abuse, to make sure that the schools are offering a decent education to kids with our public money. And so that is an uncompensated expense for the state.
And sorry.
Good point. No, go ahead, Josh.
And I would add, and Ann made a great point earlier, and this is where she and I are absolutely on the same page and have worked in tandem on state level school funding, right, through EBF and mandated categoricals. And even in our legislation surrounding evidence-based funding for K-12 schools, right, our original projected date that we were going to get every school in the state to 90% funding was, anybody know? Not this year, but
next year.
2027, right? When we started down this road and did a lot of advocacy. And I'm so thankful for, right, that the EBF came into play in 2017, and we were going to close this gap and get everybody to 90% adequate funding for kids to have adequate education by 2027. We all realize 2027 isn't going to happen. Right? So, depending on how you do the math. I mean, how many more years did the kids in my community that I love the most and the kids in your community that you love the most, and especially in a community where over 50% of my kids are low income, how many more years do they have to wait to get their education adequately funded? And so I'm a huge advocate to say we've got to get state dollars fixed here. We got to get EBF to 90+%. We got to get mandated categoricals to 90+%. We're years away from that at this point. I'm going to keep advocating for that. And I'm confident Ann will too. And many of you I know will. But what am I doing between now and then? And right, it's like, does this give me the ability to get closer to that in the interim?
I'm still hopeful that in 2 years, we're going to have a constitutional amendment and do a major restructuring of our tax system, and we will be there for EBF in 2 years. So keep working.
We have 3 minutes left. We have more questions that Amy has stockpiled, plus some in chat. We are going to answer these and send responses around in our reply. But I want to spend our last 2 minutes going back to Mentee. So I would like us to create a little working group of people who are, interested in, helping come up with Stand for Children's position on this. So, make sure you note that if you're interested in joining us and kind of more smaller group conversations to talk through some of these things and figure out where we want to go with it, please share that in your feedback. Amy, Amy doesn't need to do anything except throw up a link for us if anyone has logged out of their mentee. These mentee questions are not going to go public, but just go ahead and get back to your mentee form. There are I think 6 more questions, sort of exit survey questions. If you don't have time to get to them now, do it by tomorrow. That would be okay too. If you want to do some more homework before you answer them and then come back tomorrow. If you want to answer them now and then come back and answer them again later, I think you can probably do that. And just kind of tell us where, how you're thinking about Illinois' role in the tax credit scholarship program. And then we will get an email to everybody with these slides, with the recording, with some more FAQs, with some links to things that we discussed. And then with a smaller group of people, we'll dig a little bit deeper into some of these things. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Anne and Josh, for sharing your opinions here.